Hello, welcome everyone to the final week of the Solidarity semester. It's pretty wild that it's already been 5 weeks. If you were here last week and the weeks before, welcome back and thank you for joining us. If you're new, welcome, and we definitely encourage you to check out the past recordings at solidarities.org. For any of the new folks, my name is Catherine Foley and I'm with the Building Movement Project. This final week, we're going to be returning to some of the tools and frameworks that we've already shared and explored. And we're going to dive into the ways that they all kind of work together. So that includes the social change ecosystem map, the principles for transformative solidarity, the ecosystem of well-being, all of those tools that we've covered. We'll also share some more calls to action and offer some ways to keep the conversation going and to stay connected with one another as we move ahead. But before we get into that, I'll share what I'm sure you already all know. So this is a Zoom webinar. The participants are not visible, but you can use the Q&A and the chat to send your questions and any comments. Please feel free to share your name and your pronouns, where you're joining us from and why you're here today, and anything that you've learned over the past couple of weeks. Finally, this session, like all the other sessions, is being recorded. You can view it along with the syllabi, the tools, everything else on the website at solidarities.org. And if you've missed any of the sessions, you can go back and revisit all those materials. With that, I'll pass it over to Anna.
Hi, everyone. I hope that you had as restful a weekend as possible. And again, like Catherine, I just want to say, wow, 5 weeks. We're on our last week, and we're going to be focusing on exploring our social change ecosystem. And again, all of the content that we've gone over, we want to give you ideas of how to apply it to the actual situations that you're in currently. If you're a student, organizer, and organizing with a group on campus, how you take these tools back and use them with your fellow activists. For folks that are currently working in a job, how can you engage in these practices in your workplace? And again, taking it back to your friend groups and your family. This is a time right now where people are looking for ways to be engaged. And with all the tools that we've given you and like we said, what is up on the Padlet, this is just a good opportunity for you to also share, how do you plan on using these tools? And so we do have one more IG Live, and this one is going to be with Alex Tom. And, again, for all of you out there that are interested in civic engagement, get out the vote work, all of that, there is no person that I would recommend more to listen to on this topic than Alex Tom. He has a wealth of knowledge to share on that. So it's going to be a great conversation. So follow along on IG Live, invite others to join in. This is one of those conversations that I think is just going to be so relevant to what y'all have been mentioning or your interests. So tune in. And just going back to last week, we were talking about one of the C's in our principles for transformative solidarity, capacity. And we touched on a bit of what it is to manage or neglect your capacity. That really focuses on, I think, one of the practices that, we think about most and yet don't at times have a perfect formula for, which is managing our energy, managing our activism, managing, how we set parameters around the ways that we engage in activism so that we can actually be human beings as well, and not, productivity machines. So we had a conversation around the different tools that you can use to align your individual, your organizational, or your workplace practices along with your communities of support. And then we had this amazing conversation with Ahmed from the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. When we talk about generational moments, Ahmed just touched on so many that are probably really relevant to all of you out there in the audience, because I know for me, hearing about Trayvon Martin, hearing about all of these amazing connections that were made for organizers in the Black radical tradition here in the US, to connecting up to the concept of global solidarity, was just so, it was like a trip down memory lane from all the moments that have defined my own path in activism. And also just touching on the fact, that Ahmed brought up, this need for like real centering of joy and rest in activism, and remembering that the work goes on even when we're not there to do it. So we hope that, this was like as a exciting and rich conversation for you as it was for me, and listening in on it. And again, all of these tools, everything that we've kind of gone over is on the Padlet. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the syllabi, they're out there and have like more resources that you can look into, more articles, more tools. The recordings are on there as well. This resource isn't going anywhere, so feel free to look into it, share it, also use it within your ecosystems. And so I would like to hand it over to Deepa to kind of help us go down our own memory lane trip of the last few weeks.
Yes, thank you so much, Anna. And yeah, I totally want to echo what I see some of you saying in the chat. Pebbles saying that sad to know this is the last week and ready to use and pass down the tools that were taught. That's great. That is exactly what we want you to do. We too are kind of shocked and sad that it is over, but just for now. And we hope to stay in touch with you. We'll be talking about that a little bit later also. But as Anna mentioned, and as we talked about when we started the Solidarity semester, obviously we are all living through these generational moments, right? And as you might remember, from the beginning, we identified a few of those: the pandemic, the protests, economic instability, the volatility of our politics and political environment, just to name a few. That obviously is on top of whatever personal challenges each of us is facing in this climate and in this moment. And I think it's also important to remember that living through generational moments also has this opportunity to it, right? To get to the next stage. And sometimes we get to that next stage through movements, through activists like yourselves, and through organizations. And so over the past 5 weeks, we've been trying to talk about and highlight examples of social change movements and activists and organizations and campaigns that folks can get involved with, as well as resources and tools. So the first one we want to remind you of on the next slide is where we started, which was the social change ecosystem map. And you'll probably remember how we talked about how this map and utilizing it can be a tool of self-awareness to better understand what our skills are, to understand how we could stretch into roles that we want to play, and to understand where we can align our roles and our values best, right? So you might remember how you identified roles when we first asked you, and I would love to know, curious to know, if you want to drop it into the chat, if your role has changed a little bit, right? As you have been going through the Solidarity semester. Is there a role you see yourself playing now that is different? Is there a role that you're interested in stretching into? So tell us in the chat if something like that has been on your mind. But the one thing I really wanted to highlight about this ecosystem map, which we haven't had a chance to yet, is that it is an ecosystem, right? And what I mean by that is that, as you can see from the pictorial representation, these different roles are interconnected. They're interconnected with each other, and they're also connected to values as well. And it's important to think about how is it that these roles play out in our various ecosystems. So on the next slide, we have some examples of what ecosystems could look like. What are the characteristics of ecosystems, right? So I often think about ecosystems that happen in nature as a way to think about this, right? Our body is an ecosystem. There are lots of moving parts that we don't even know about that kind of work together in some way, right? If we are so lucky, they work together. Also, you could find an ecosystem in something as small as a spider web to something as large as an ocean, right? Thinking about all of the different components, living creatures that actually come together to live with each other in an ecosystem. even our ancestors lived in ecosystems and still do in many parts of the world, right? In many ways in the United States, we focus on this kind of individualistic way of living that is oftentimes not really what social change is about. So if you think of, I often think of, because I'm a mom, I often think of how in the US there's this concept of a nuclear family that, you know, it's really like two people and a child, for example, right, that are supposed to make it all happen. And I think what people are recognizing is that this isn't really an ecosystem, right? And what we have, many of us, at least I know from my tradition of my ancestors in India, for example, it was a family. Like I grew up with my grandparents and my cousins, and that's how I grew up, right? And it's very different for my son. And so building his ecosystem is something I think about. So the reason I say that is because our ecosystems should be interconnected. They are about building solidarity and connection, not being siloed. They're about the collective. So when you think of your ecosystem, think about how you would characterize it. We're all part of different ecosystems, right? What roles do people play in those ecosystems that you have? So if you have thoughts on that, please let us know in the chat as well. But there are some characteristics that we want you to keep in mind as you think about your social change ecosystem map. Is your ecosystem connected? What are the characteristics about it, right? How can you make it more connected? What roles are people playing? Is it a diverse ecosystem, or are people playing all the same roles? So those are some thoughts to think about. I'm going to go into the chat as we actually put up a poll right now to ask you about your ecosystem, where folks are, I think, talking a little bit about your roles. And Sage says, I have resonated with caregiving. And the poll is up if you want to take a quick look at it. What ecosystems do you play a role in is the question. And if none of these work for you, you can put them in the chat. So Sage says, I've resonated most with caregiving, but hoping to become more of a builder and a storyteller. That's great. Valerie says, I couldn't see myself in a role at first, but now I think guide, caregiver, healer. I need to do more research, listening, and self-introspection before I know for sure. Yes. And I really want to recommend the guide that we put together that goes along with the ecosystem map that can ask you the questions that you might want to think about. Pebble says, I think my roles fluctuate depending on capacity. Absolutely. But I want to go deeper into healing. That's great. Okay, so let's take a quick check on what folks said in terms of their ecosystems. So it looks like most folks are actually there. They would say that they're part of nonprofit organizations and workplaces. And then we've got college groups, we've got neighborhood mutual aid associations and faith or cultural groups as well. So that's great. I think it's so important to recognize that we've got different ecosystems and we might play different roles depending on the ecosystem, right? And that too can be a real interesting thing to reflect on. Like, how do I show up with my friends versus my nonprofit organization? Are there similarities or not, right? And so Catherine has put into the chat the bit.ly link for the ecosystem roadmap so you can get a sense of the guide and some of those questions as you think about your roles, but also your ecosystems. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna to talk about how this connects with the solidarity principles.
Thanks, Deepa. And I just saw, going back to the comment that I saw in the chat, Pebble said, the role that I play is definitely like shifted by my capacity. And so, we may have explored these different tools week by week, but we definitely think that like a usage of them is just layering on top of each other. So how does, the quality of centering factor in if you are a weaver? How do you focus on commonalities even as you are a disruptor? So all of these, different characteristics, different principles for transformative solidarity practices. I'm just going to quickly go through the definitions. And then we're going to talk about, some questions that, I know that I definitely still have in engaging in social change work, and some questions that may be resonating with you. But I also just want to welcome you to drop your own questions about the principles in the chat. to start, centering is something that we've talked about a lot, and that I know is a concept that is constantly being pushed out there these days. Whose voices are being centered, whose experiences, whose demands are at the center of the social change work that we are doing. Why is that important? Because depending on whose experiences we're listening to and what demands are being made, we're pushing different solutions in terms of, what the different strategies that you use in social change work are. Commonalities. So we talked about the fact that we kind of need to start at getting to know each other, listening as being a very active part of seeking commonalities and actually asking questions of each other, focusing on what we have more in common than what divides us. Connections also, thinking through historically how we have, how the different movements that we're a part of have actually interconnected with each other. And, instead of doing a kind of either a oppression Olympics or a equating of all experiences, how connections actually allows us to embrace and uplift the differences in our history while also finding the finding the connections and the commonalities that make us work in solidarity with each other. Then we have co-liberation, which we discussed in connection with co-conspiratorship. And they were in conversation with each other because when we think about liberation, a quote that I think definitely comes up a lot is, the idea that my liberation is bound up in yours. Diving deeper into what that means, it's that we fight for each other and we take a risk. We see that in fighting for each other, we actually all gain something. And we focused on those topics in particular with talking about something that, is super relevant just today. Yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day. And we've also talked a lot about anti-Black racism and the role that it's played in these generational moments that we've experienced. It's like, not you can't understate just how much this moment or you can't can't emphasize enough just how much this moment is a reckoning of the history of anti-Black racism in the United States, and also the erasure of Indigenous communities. A lot of the moments that have brought us all into the fold this year have centered around land, have centered around sovereignty, have centered around a neglect of the spatial racism that still exists and that we all experience. And then lastly, going into capacity, which we focused on last week, just this ability to stop and actually assess not only how we as individuals are connected into the movement, but also how that shapes the work that we take on, how it shapes our approach to things. And I think that one of the big things that we've kind of talked about is our energy and our, just urgency around fighting for liberation and fighting for equality can be endless. And in fact, probably is. But our energy and our ability to show up is not. So how do we safely and sustainably get involved at a pace that actually allows our passion to meet the work that we put out there? And one of the things I just want to add on this is, you've probably noticed from all of our tools, we offer a lot of questions because there is no perfect way to engage. There is no set formula on how to maintain a balance between your capacity and, again, your sense of urgency in fighting for liberation. There is only an increasing amount of self-awareness that you can have on what you're capable of doing at any moment and what is necessary and what is being called for at any given moment. And I think that was, a lot of the conversations that we've had with other movement leaders has really focused on the fact that we are all continuously trying to figure out for ourselves what connects us all together is that desire to just continue showing up. And so in these solidarity principles, the questions, again, that I will say that we have no set answers for, but are good questions to continue focusing on are, how do we center directly affected communities without speaking for them? And, you know, for you out there, some of those questions might be, how do I, as an impacted person, show up in these spaces in which it's my experiences that someone is talking about? And, you know, one of the ways that people offered before, or like some of the thoughts that people offered before on this particular question is the idea that like, it isn't an impacted person's job, or it isn't someone that is being oppressed's job to tell you how to show up. But then there's also this other end of it of, you know, there are so many resources out there that gives you ideas on how to show up. We've also talked a lot about localizing the struggle. So there are all these generational moments that geographically may not be happening in your backyard, but should prompt you to think about does this issue show up in my community? Then we also have the question of how do we build long-term relationships and friendships? Because I feel like one of the things I'd also add to like the tools that we've given you and the definitions that we've given you, you all probably have been practicing these things in some way your whole life. Transformative solidarity, in other words, is building meaningful relationships. And understanding that the process of building those meaningful relationships shapes the outcome of the work that we are doing to make this world a world in which all of us receive dignity and respect. And so this question, how do we build long-term relationships and friendships? Especially when we talk about how squads are something that sustain us in the work, is also like a question that, or is also a, you know, a lingering thought that we should have, and also something that, you know, as we all think about self-care and community care, how do we show up for each other? What are the ways in which we, you know, maintain those boundaries between like what we're able to give to the movement at any given moment, and what we have to keep for ourselves. And then, you know, lastly, how do we strengthen our capacity in times of crisis? This is, I think, one of those, you know, last week we asked y'all a question in the polls, like, how are you feeling, basically? And half of y'all said, like, you know, energized, ready to take action, feeling the need to jump in. And other folks said like hopeless, feeling a little overwhelmed at, you know, the pace at which things are happening. And so I, you know, want to offer that in times of crisis, like I mentioned, there is no formula to plug in on what you should be doing, how you should be engaging. There is only the self-awareness of knowing what role am I playing in my social change ecosystem? What role do I have the capacity to play in my social change ecosystem? And how do I build the trust with other members of my social change ecosystem to be able to, you know, understand that the work will go on without me, and that I can plug in at another moment. Crises offer both opportunities, but they also are, but they also can be moments of like actual stillness and introspection. And so this is, you know, talking about the solidarity principles in conversation with your social change ecosystem might be a good exercise now, given that we're in a different moment of crises 5 weeks later than we were, you know, when we started the solidarity semester. And that potentially will be, you know, in the next few weeks. Using these two tools in conversation will allow you to get the clarity that you need within your social change ecosystem to know how to engage and how to build sustainable practices for your movement work going forward. And with that, you know, I want to just talk about our ecosystem for well-being. Although I see a lot of activity in the chat, so I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything that might be relevant to mention in this section. Okay. Yes. Awesome. Okay. Yes, we were. So on the topic of Indigenous Peoples Day, at some point during the session, I'll drop in the Land Back campaign that was launched yesterday. An incredibly powerful solidarity-based tool that just focuses on like the interconnected history between Black and Indigenous folks in the US and like steps that people can take to engage in action. And also going back to this ecosystem of well-being, just wanted to, focus on, again, dispel, addressing some of the misconceptions around self-care, which is that it is capitalist by nature, when in fact self-care is just another term that we have for like giving yourself breaks, ensuring that you're checking in with your squad. All of these things, these individual practices, are forms of self-care. Moments of stillness, finding joy, clarifying your roles. I think there was like last time we had a conversation around like the heaviness that can exist when we overwhelm ourselves with the idea that we have to take action now because the moment is now, the urgency is now. When in fact, there is a lot of room to take a moment and strategize and think through what the best course of action is. The work is many, the workers are few. I may have like not quoted that scripture properly, but the idea that, we are all engaging in this work collectively, and there's more than enough for us to go, more than enough of us and our power collectively to address any particular issue at the moment, which goes into these next two circles of organizational practices and communities of support. So it isn't just on you, it isn't just on us as the individual to engage in social change work. There are also like there are organizations and communities geared towards that. And understanding the different practices that can be set in those spaces to ensure that we have some sustainability and an ecosystem of well-being. We talked about, being able to set have conversations around how we are as human beings functioning in this particular moment. So just pointing out, restorative healing and transformative practices. We didn't get a chance to go super in depth in those, but that's again a opportunity to look at the syllabus and see some of the tools that we outlined, particularly when it came to addressing trauma, vicarious trauma, which I know is like something that is, a thought that might be rumbling around in your head, like how are we taking in all of this information and how are we maintaining those boundaries? I saw in the chat that folks were like, I'm not on social media, how do I access some of these tools? That was also some of the practices that were set up, that we talked about in terms of organizational practices and individual practices, being able to set boundaries, for yourself, not doom scrolling. And then lastly, looking at these communities of support. Again, we talked about the squads in particular, which seem to be most folks' favorite way of leaning into sustainability practices, but also talking about, coaches, education and skills development. Again, what we offered in this solidarity semester was a language, if you will, for engaging in this work. But likely you already have your own, in your own spaces, lots of these practices. You just may not have called them that. So this gives you kind of an opportunity for, in the spaces in which you don't have these sustainability practices, to have that conversation, and to do it resourcing using a resource that has guiding questions. So that was our ecosystem of well-being. And with that, I will pass it on to Deepa, who's going to talk about yet another tool.
Yes, we have so many tools. We're going to build out a curriculum. So yeah, I know we're kind of going through a lot of information, but this one I wanted to just quickly introduce because I actually think that everything that Anna just talked about and all the other tools that we've identified sort of fall within this. And this is called a movement pantry. And so first I want to credit Trish Shum, my co-partner in developing this. And what we kind of came together when we thought about this was this idea that, when COVID started, one of the things that people would talk about was stocking their pantry. and like going to the grocery store and figuring out what they needed, right? And so we sort of thought about how similarly we have a lot of material in our own pantries when it comes to the work that we do. And oftentimes, especially in times of crisis, we can be in a space of scarcity instead of a place of abundance, right? We think we don't have the right practices. We don't have the right analysis. We don't have the right sources to go to. And we can get into a place of not knowing how to respond and feeling overwhelmed. So we really wanted to subvert that idea by thinking about how each of us does have a movement pantry. Now, not all of our shelves are filled, right, to capacity at all, you know, but the 3 shelves that we identified were frameworks, which is sort of like analysis. So what Anna just presented, the solidarity principles, is a framework, right? Practices. So practices are the ways in which we take those frameworks and put them into action. The social change ecosystem role mapping is a practice, actually, that can help us take on a role, right? And then relationships are what we've been saying all along, that all of this work is relational, and it's about building trust, and it's about building relationships. So whether that is one-on-one, whether it is with a network, a coalition, an organization, right? How do we do that? And so the squad that Anna talked about is exactly what is envisioned by this idea of relationships. So what this particular tool allows you to do, and thank you, Catherine, for dropping into the chat the reflection guide, because everything that we create has a reflection guide to it, right? Is that it allows you to actually work through what is in your movement pantry. And it also enables you to identify what you already have, because there is abundance, right? There is knowledge that we have that, just like Anna said, that, you know, folks are already putting into place and practice things that you've learned and observed and that is inside of you. And at the same time, there are things we don't know. And so what are those things, right? So if I am working on an issue related to, you know, one of the issues that I talked about earlier was around Islamophobia. So if I am interested in understanding and being a co-conspirator around dismantling Islamophobia, what frameworks do I need to learn about, right? Are those books, articles, analysis? Who do I need to learn from? Practices, what do I need to do to be a co-conspirator in dismantling Islamophobia? How do I show up? How do I actually utilize my power and privilege in order to show up, in order to perhaps get my people, right? And then relationships, who are the organizations and the people that I actually am learning from and building from? So that's just an example of how you can go through this guide to understand what's in your movement pantry, depending on whatever campaign or cause or situation or issue you want to be part of. And I think one of the other quick things I'll say about this is that it also invites you to borrow and share. And so what does that mean? Just like in our pantries, right? In our kitchen pantries, you know, you would share what you have with others, thinking about how we can be mentors, how we can actually ask people, what is it that you need? Because I might have that relationship, right? And also borrow. So asking, you know, I actually don't understand how to utilize a transformative solidarity practice or principle of centering. I don't understand it. So how do I learn, right? So borrowing and sharing, abundance and scarcity, right? Thinking about all of those kind of underlying principles is what led us to this idea of the movement pantry. And hopefully it can also be something that you can use to fill yours. I think we have a poll right now that we're going to put up about understanding and learning what is in your movement pantry and what you need to fill up your movement pantry as well. So let's see if we can put that poll up. Or maybe we don't have that poll. Okay, we don't have that poll. So we're going to move on. But instead, I do want to make sure that you take a look at the link so that you're able to actually ask and answer the questions that you need to in order to fill up your movement pantry. All right, so with that, I am going to actually ask folks a little bit more about, yeah, actually, let's put up that poll, Catherine was just chatting me about the poll that we should be putting up before we get into the next section. So this is a poll actually that we want to ask you about, because this is also part of the Solidarity semester is part of your movement pantry. And so what we want to know is, what do you feel more confident about having gone through this 5-week online session, right? Because all of this, your understanding of solidarity practice, the shared vocabulary or shared language that Anna had mentioned earlier, knowing that you want to be part of social change movements, figuring out your role, all of this is part of your movement pantry. So take a look and let us know what you feel more confident about having gone through the semester. Okay, what are we finding? Okay, having a shared vocabulary about social change and solidarity was the highest, which is wonderful to hear. So that's the framework, right? And then that's been followed by my role in being part of social change, which is a self-awareness practice. And also kind of close by understanding of transformative solidarity and what I need to do to be a co-conspirator, knowing where to turn for resources and tools. So that's great. And if there are others that folks found or have ideas about, please go ahead and write them into the chat. I see Shramona writing examples of problem solving to answer nitty-gritty questions and the way the capacity works across roles. It's great. Thank you. So again, the reason that we wanted to do that poll is to demonstrate that you've got a pretty abundant movement pantry yourself and that you can continue to add to it. So we want to then go on to, as we kind of go into the last part of our session today, also filling up your movement pantry by asking our team to share some of their experiences. So what I have asked them to do is to share 1 to 2 tips for folks who are desiring to get more involved in social change work. You know, what do they recommend? What do they wish they had known, perhaps, when they were getting started? And before, so I'm going to ask Shelby and then Catherine, Deborah, and Anna to say a few words. So Shelby, go ahead.
Hey everyone. I can't believe it's the last week of the semester. I think the biggest thing for me in being involved in this work is to the degree possible, put your ego to the side and approach everything from this position of learning and listening and being a student, as you guys have all done so beautifully over the course of the semester. I'm gonna nerd out for a bit. So I am a graduate student and I focus on this very niche, like human-animal relationships and multi-species studies. And I read this book earlier this year called Decolonizing Extinction. And I can drop it in the chat, but it's from this amazing feminist scholar who did an ethnography of orangutan rehabilitation in Malaysia. And so much of what she's arguing in the book is that the idea of keeping a species alive, right, sounds great. But then in reality, how does that actually affect the people who have to carry out that work, the orangutans themselves? Like, how can you, in the course of seeking something good, you can reproduce violences and you can make horrible mistakes. But I think the notion that like liberation is not something you impose on other people, it's something that we're all building together. And so listen to yourself, as Anna has brought up multiple times. Ask yourself what you're good at and what brings you joy and what you love to do. And then listen to the people that are most affected by these multiple unfolding crises and ask what is needed and where can you fill in. I would say think locally, you know, look for mutual aid groups in your town, in your city, start a reading group among your friends, go with someone to a protest, but know that it doesn't have to look one way. I would think so much that this book has had a huge effect on me as a participant in these social movements and in social change work. But like, we're not going to tell you to go out and write an ethnography of orangutan rehabilitation in Malaysia. That's just not, you know, so follow your own goals and your own passions and be really open and listen, and know that there are so many ways to get involved with ongoing movements for change and to contribute to your own ecosystem.
Thanks, Shelby. That's super helpful. And I think it's a reminder that not everyone has to be like a professional activist or work in a professionalized nonprofit, right? There's a role that we can play regardless of what context we're in. And I just also wanted to take a moment to thank Shelby for her amazing work throughout Solidarity semester, whether it is to take like my crude drawings on pieces of paper of graphics that you see and turn them into something that looks nicer, much nicer, or putting together the Solidarity syllabi, putting together our slide decks. Shelby has been amazing throughout this entire semester, so wanted to lift up her work as well. So next, I think it's Catherine, 1 to 2 tips.
All right, I have a long ramble. So when you asked me about this, I wrote out like a 2-page Word doc and I had to condense it. So I think what will help first is to just talk about like a huge barrier for me. And it comes back to what Anna has been talking about. And it kind of comes back to this program that I did called CBT. And that's about, it's a cognitive behavioral therapy program for anxiety. And one of the main learnings that I got from that was that your thoughts can happen a lot faster than you can figure out the words to describe them. So one of my big barriers is getting overwhelmed. When I'm thinking about things that upset me or things that make me angry, I will get overwhelmed and I won't know what to do next. And I think that's pretty common. So when I think of all the things that are wrong, it's hard for me to frame it in a way of, thinking of a solution. So how can I even do anything? How can I enter a conversation that I don't know anything about? How do I even learn about something when I don't know the language to talk about it? So one thing that has helped me a lot is acknowledging that I'm not the first one to think about these things and that there's a ton of literature and knowledge out there, and I just need to find it and engage with it. And that's hard also, but there are steps that you can take to do that. For example, I've been recently thinking a lot about living under capitalism while being anti-capitalist and how you can survive within a capitalist structure when you want it to not exist. So I've been asking my friends and my colleagues and other people that I know who have been thinking about this kind of stuff, to engage in conversation. And they can't give me answers. They can't give me a neat packaged answer that will make me feel okay with living my life, but they have recommended a lot of readings, and it's simple things like read this person's autobiography because they think about this a lot. And if anything, it'll give you a language to talk about something that you want to, investigate further. And I don't know, I think you can't undo capitalism in a day. I'm not a critical theorist. So the most that I can do is read up and donate money and learn about what kind of power or privilege or positionality I have to make change. And so that's all to say, obviously you'll get overwhelmed about things, but just try to ask questions and think about, put, words to your thoughts, because like I mentioned, thoughts happen faster than we can identify them. So trying to just think about what we want to learn, who we can go ask to educate us without being a burden, and, finding where this work exists. Because, as long as the issues that have been oppressing us have existed, there have been people working against them. So there's so much work, there's so much history that we can learn about, and it's all documented. We just need to find it, and we're not learning from scratch. So we're not starting from scratch.
That is absolutely, I love the way that you said that as long as there have been problems, there have been solutions, right? And that's also just takes me back to the movement pantry again. So thank you for kind of highlighting some of the ways that you build yours, Catherine. And again, just wanted to do a shout out to Catherine and really thank her for being the backbone of the Solidarity semester in so many ways. Catherine is the one who sends you the emails. Catherine is the one who puts together so much of the social media you see on the Instagram and Twitter accounts for Building Movement Project. So really, really want to appreciate you, Catherine, for all of the work and support that you have given the Solidarity semester. So thank you.
Yay, thanks.
Yeah, so Deborah, 1 to 2 tips that you would share.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Shelby and Catherine, for sharing such eloquent ways to get involved in social change. I think for me, something that, as I was kind of reflecting on my own experiences, what I found just super useful, especially while I was a student, was seeking out those resources like career services or just like databases that can compile a lot of different types of opportunities like internships and other programs so that I could kind of dip my toes into various types of work and action so I can learn. As Shelby said, I can reflect on the type of work that I want to be doing, figure out what I'm good at and what I enjoy working on, so that I could then establish connections, like let's say with a supervisor for an internship program, and then use them as a resource, ask them questions about their own experiences, maybe ask for connections that they have with other people in the field doing this work, just so you could seek out that insight and continue to learn what you find important and what work you want to be doing. And if maybe you aren't a student, look into, as Shelby said, like lifting up that piece about maybe local organizations in your area that are working on issues that you're passionate about. If you can look them up on social media, I think that's a great tool, or look them up online and see what types of actions they're putting on. Is there someone that you can connect with at that organization that can kind of plug you into different opportunities that they are hosting? So I think, yeah, it's all about kind of pinpointing the areas that you're interested in and then doing that work to seek out resources and people that can help you plug into those areas.
Thanks so much, Deborah. That's super practical and really helpful, and not surprising because Deborah is, I think, the person on our team who is really good about the details and has been single-handedly working on the Power Up internship program and putting it together and making sure that folks are receiving responses and getting matched up. And so, Deborah, thank you so much for your work on Power Up and the Solidarity semester as a whole. So, Anna, couple of tips from you.
Yeah. Well, again, everyone's answers before me were beautiful and eloquent. And what I will offer is actually like the opposite, which is like every day is not going to be the perfect day to engage in action. You are not going to be able to show up 100% every single day. You are going to make mistakes. And also, you know, in the course of doing social change work, you're going to engage in so much code switching because it literally is a language that you're learning for practices that for many of us are just like the way that we grew up. Things that people call deep canvassing are just meaningful conversations. Things that are called like being, you know, the caretaker in your family are what other people call organizing. You know, things that we, you know, talk about in terms of like community care and self-care practices are the ways in which our families survived immigrating into this country. And so, you know, one of like my biggest tip is just like being your own problematic fave, embracing all the aspects of you that, you know, are challenging, because transformative solidarity at its core is healing. And that act of individually healing can actually shift spaces. But healing happens when you dispel shame and stigma, and this idea that there is a perfect way to engage in things. Being anti-capitalist at your core is understanding that we are all not, you know, again, just modes of production, that we're people that have, you know, needs, and that relationships are not transactional, but rather are like the mechanism by which we could actually all have all the things that we need. And so that's my advice. You know, nurture yourself and care for yourself on the days in which it feels most difficult. And, you know, I boil this down to one comparison, which is not every day is Coachella for Beyonce. So not every day is the day you whip out that 2.5 long performance that is just stunning and changes the world. Some days, you're just like lounging around, getting made fun of by Blue Ivy. So, enjoy every single day that you engage in this, and have grace for yourself.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. You always like have that that pop culture reference that everyone's like, yes. But I also wanted to lift up Anna because, as folks probably know, Anna, I think, said this in the beginning too, in the very first session, that Anna is a guide and a teacher and has literally lived up to that through our solidarity schools and obviously through the solidarity semester, with the content that she's created, with the way that she's delivered the content and connected with so many folks. So thank you, Anna, for being a true co-creator of the Solidarity Schools and the Solidarity Semester. And while she isn't here, I wanted to also lift up Marone, who's part of our team as well, who's been responsible for a lot of the images and the graphics and the social media content, as well as supporting Power Up. So Marone is also part of our team. And it's been so great to work with all of you. We pulled this out, I think, like in record time. And I don't think that it would have happened without this group of people coming together to do it. And it's been a real pleasure to be able to kind of build every single week and also to learn and course correct as we need to. Someone asked in the chat earlier, I think the Q&A, will this be offered again? We hope so. We're gonna ask you in a poll at the very end, if you would recommend this, right, to people in your lives. And we do hope so. We've been, Anna and I have done Solidarity Schools before, and this was a little bit newer for us. But I think that there's no reason why we wouldn't do it again if people feel like it's helpful to actually have some movement education, especially for folks who are entering movement spaces. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna to take us through the last couple of slides.
Of course, but we cannot go on without also giving you a shout out, Deepa, for creating all of these amazing tools. Because as you can see, like the work that we've done is like very much spans across like disciplines, spans across expertise, spans across like personal experiences. We wouldn't all be here if it weren't for Deepa bringing us all together and being an excellent weaver. And also just being, again, a visionary that saw the need for there to be some bridge that I think all of us have, kind of felt at some point, like we know how to do social change work in our communities and ourselves. Like, how do we also engage with it on a larger level? Deepa saw that need and created these tools. So thank you very much, Deepa, for kind of being the person that is responsible for us all being here today. So thank you. And our calls to action, y'all, because we've got some. So again, this is like very much boils down to some like organic steps that are probably also things that you will have thought of, but we just want to reinforce. This is a call to action to learn more, to really like think through whatever it is that you are passionate about on different levels. Do I know the history of what I am learning? Do I know like where the different layers of, law, policy, all of that dig into it? Do I know the organizations working on it? There's a challenge to learn more. But also rest and joy, all, in your social change ecosystem, ensuring that y'all are having some accountability around fun. And then also finding your ecosystems, finding other places in which you can engage in this work. Like I said, we're going to talk about how we all can stay in touch because we are also another ecosystem that you are now plugged into. Sharing this information with others, like we said, all of us the foundation of most of our organizing work and our social change work are relationships. But when we're bringing new people into spaces, it's also like a really a way of ensuring like clarity to just give them some tools initially, some vocabulary to, spring your relationship and your work off of. Stretching into your roles. I cannot stress enough how inspiring this year has been in terms of how the youth you know, all of y'all have stepped up. And I know some of y'all are in here and are not, you know, the 18 to 25. So I also want to say thank you for all the work that you've been doing. But I cannot stress enough how amazing it is to have been in touch with some of you throughout this program and to hear the grace, poise, just amazing like energy that y'all have in bringing into this. We need y'all as visionaries. We need y'all as experimenters. You push the movement into a better iteration. So stretch into those roles and be the leader that you're looking for in the room. Find a mentor and coach a mentee. Again, maybe it was Shelby, I believe, that said this. But just about like, or Shelby or Deborah, about being like learners and teachers constantly. That's what we're, you know, here to do. Y'all just, you know, don't let ageism hold y'all back. You have important things to say. Mentor someone, or also like tap into your network of old guards and look for folks to guide you into new spaces. And then again, cultivate an attitude of gratitude. So, you know, there is so much collective power to shift this world into what we want it to look like. You know, as long as there has been oppression, there have been people fighting back against it. Also hearkening back to our Solidarity Semester crew who dropped some gems. We are a part of a very long tradition of resistance. Own that, step into that, live that, believe that. And with that, I, you know, just wanted to point out our last communication with y'all around like, how can we stay connected? So let us know how we can continue learning and sharing with y'all. So thank you. Okay, so I mean, it feels like we're all kind of equally spread around in terms of ideas for staying in touch, which is exciting. But you know, Instagram topped it out, and skill sharing sessions via Solidarity is. So we're gonna be in touch because all y'all really told us is that you really want to keep talking to us, and we really want to keep talking to you. And we're going to have one last opportunity in our sessions through this conversation with Alex Tom on Thursday via Instagram Live. And again, for all of y'all taking social media detoxes, this will be on the Padlet afterwards, so you will have access to it via that link. And with that, I would like to pass this on to Deepa.
Yeah, so we are almost done. We have like a minute. So I wanted to end with this next slide, because I think that it is really important that we think about what it is that we're creating. And I think that, you know, many of you had probably read this quote by Arundhati Roy, where she talked a little bit about how the pandemic is a portal and it's a gateway between one world and the next. And I just really like that visual of understanding that we are in transition, right? And we are actually in a moment where we can make change, structural systemic change. And so Alice Walker's really powerful quote, look closely at the present you are constructing, it should look like the future you are dreaming, right? So whether that is in our personal lives, in our relationships, and in our movement spaces, how do we keep this in mind, right? As we are creating, how do we not get overwhelmed or feel that things are hopeless? It's okay to feel those ways. I do all the time. It is absolutely okay. And also recognize that we're living through a moment of tremendous transformation and possibility for ourselves individually, and also all of us as communities. So I wanted to leave you with these visionary quotes, and also give you one last poll that we would really like you to take as you are on your way out. It's very fast. How likely are you to recommend the Solidarity Semester? So let us know. where you stand on that. And as you leave, please check out with a phrase that reflects how you're feeling about the Solidarity semester and what you've gained. Appreciate some of the other shout outs that we heard from folks, but would love to hear from as many people as possible as you check out some phrases, right, that really reflect where you're at. And let's maybe we'll take a look at that poll as well. But I think more importantly, just want to read out what some of you all are saying. Empowered, gratitude, change doesn't happen overnight. Grateful, grounded in the wonder of learning more from one another. Warm-hearted. That's great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you do. And we are looking forward to seeing you out in the digital streets, out on the real streets, and in various movement spaces all around our communities. Thank you so much. See you all soon. Bye.